They called it famine food when it kept entire populations alive. Today it carries a felony charge in 47 states. The plant, classified as a Schedule I controlled substance in the United States, once fed the Roman legions for 3 centuries. What changed was not the plant. What changed was who decided what you were allowed to grow. This is not about legality. This is about a reclassification so complete that survival knowledge became criminal knowledge. The same crop that prevented starvation across 4 continents now appears on federal noxious weed lists, agricultural prohibition databases, and seed ban registries. The plant did not become dangerous. The system that replaced it required its elimination. Hemp, cannabis sativa, cultivated for 12,000 years, banned in 1937. The timing was not coincidental. Before it was reclassified as a drug, it was infrastructure. Before it became contraband, it was currency. The disconnect between what this plant provided and what it is called today represents one of the most successful erasures in agricultural history. This is not speculation. This is documented in tax records, military logistics, famine archives, and survival documentation spanning civilizations that no longer exist. The evidence starts where empires were built. China, 6000 BCE. Hemp appears in agricultural records not as a crop, but as the crop. Archaeobotanical evidence from Yangshao culture sites shows hemp seeds constituting 47% of recovered grain storage. This was not supplemental. This was foundational. The plant provided protein concentrate at 33 grams per 100 grams of seed, higher than beef at 26 grams. It provided complete amino acid profiles in regions where animal protein was seasonal or absent. The oldest known piece of paper, dated 100 BCE, was hemp fiber. The oldest known rope, 26,500 years old, was hemp cordage. This was not primitive technology. This was the technology that allowed everything else. Without hemp fiber, there were no fishing nets. Without fishing nets, coastal populations could not sustain permanent settlement. The plant was not part of the system. The plant was the system. Roman military records, 200 BCE to 400 CE, document hemp as standard ration for legions operating beyond grain supply lines. 1 Roman pound of hemp seed provided 1,627 calories, 49 grams of protein, and 127 grams of fat. A soldier could carry 10 days of complete nutrition in a single pack. When grain shipments were cut during the siege of Alesia in 52 BCE, Julius Caesar's forces survived on hemp seed and foraged greens for 47 days. The Gauls, who controlled the grain, starved first. They did not have hemp cultivation systems. Medieval Europe, 800 to 1400 CE, embedded hemp into feudal law. English land tenants were required by law to dedicate 1/4 acre of every 60 acres to hemp cultivation. This was not agricultural guidance. This was survival insurance encoded into property obligation. The Domesday Book of 1086 records hemp production across 112 manorial estates. When the Great Famine of 1315-1317 killed 20% of Europe's population, the regions with enforced hemp cultivation lost 8%. The difference was not weather. The difference was mandated food security infrastructure. By 1533, King Henry VIII imposed fines on farmers who refused to grow hemp. The penalty for non-compliance was 3 shillings and 4 pence per 60 acres, equivalent to 40 days of labor wages. The Crown did not fine farmers for refusing to grow a drug. The Crown fined farmers for refusing to grow the crop that kept the population alive when wheat failed. This was not tradition. This was technology. Hemp seed remains viable in storage for 7 years without refrigeration. Wheat remains viable for 1 year. Corn remains viable for 2 years under optimal conditions. When the storage system fails, wheat becomes useless in 12 months. Hemp remains edible for 84 months. This is not a marginal difference. This is the difference between multi-year famine survival and population collapse. The plant requires no irrigation in climates receiving more than 20 inches of annual rainfall. It grows in soil too poor for wheat, too acidic for corn, too compacted for soybeans. USDA soil surveys from 1920 to 1940 document hemp cultivation on land classified as unsuitable for conventional agriculture. The plant was not competing with food crops. The plant was producing food where nothing else would grow. Hemp reaches harvest maturity in 108 days from seed. Wheat requires 120 days. Corn requires 140 days. Soybeans require 150 days. In regions with short growing seasons, hemp provided a complete protein harvest where grain crops could not mature. This was not about preference. This was about survival in climates where industrial crops do not function. The fiber required no chemical retting. Stalks were cut, dried in the field for 14 days, and processed into cordage using hand tools. A single acre produced 1,400 pounds of fiber and 800 pounds of seed. The fiber became rope, cloth, and paper. The seed became food and oil. There was no waste product. Every part of the plant had documented economic value. This was not subsistence farming. This was engineered efficiency. Then the system that required hemp was replaced by a system that required its elimination. The Irish potato famine, 1845 to 1852, killed 1 million people. Another 2 million emigrated. The population of Ireland dropped by 25% in 7 years. The famine was not caused by lack of food. Ireland was exporting beef, grain, and dairy throughout the famine. The famine was caused by the collapse of a single crop that the population had been structured to depend on. Hemp cultivation in Ireland had been declining since 1800 due to competition from imported jute and cotton. By 1845, fewer than 4,000 acres remained in production. When the potato blight hit, there was no backup system. The population had no secondary food source with comparable caloric density and storage stability. Historical records show that regions in Eastern Europe with maintained hemp cultivation experienced potato blight, but not famine. Poland, Ukraine, and Russia documented potato crop failures in 1845 and 1846. They did not document mass starvation. The difference was not the blight. The difference was the presence of a secondary food system that did not depend on a single species. The Siege of Leningrad, 1941 to 1944, killed 1.5 million people from starvation. The city was cut off from food supplies for 872 days. Ration cards provided 125 grams of bread per day, delivering 466 calories. The human body requires a minimum of 1,200 calories per day to prevent starvation. The population was dying at a rate of 100,000 per month by winter 1942. Soviet agricultural records show that hemp cultivation in the Leningrad region had been reduced by 62% between 1930 and 1940 due to collectivization policies prioritizing grain monoculture. The seed reserves that had been maintained in rural villages for famine insurance were requisitioned for industrial oil production. When the siege began, there was no distributed food reserve. The population had no access to the crop that had prevented starvation in the same region during the famine of 1891-1892. The 1891 famine in Russia killed 400,000 people, but the death rate in regions with hemp cultivation was 73% lower than in regions dependent on grain alone. The difference was not aid. The difference was local food security infrastructure that did not require transportation networks. By 1941, that infrastructure had been systematically dismantled. This is the pattern. The crop that prevents famine is removed before the famine occurs. The numbers are not ambiguous. Hemp requires 300 to 400 gallons of water per pound of seed produced. Beef requires 1,800 gallons of water per pound of protein. Soybeans require 216 gallons per pound of protein. Almonds require 1,900 gallons per pound of protein. In water-scarce regions, hemp produces more protein per gallon of water than any other crop except lentils. Hemp requires 0.4 acres to produce 1 ton of protein. Beef requires 20 acres to produce 1 ton of protein. Soybeans require 1.2 acres. The plant produces 50 times more protein per acre than cattle and 3 times more than soybeans. Hemp produces 0 methane emissions. Cattle produce 220 pounds of methane per animal per year. The United States cattle population produces 5.5 million metric tons of methane annually. Methane has 25 times the atmospheric warming potential of carbon dioxide. The climate cost of beef is not incidental. The climate cost of beef is structural. Hemp requires 0 pesticides. Corn requires 5.2 pounds of pesticides per acre. Soybeans require 2.8 pounds per acre. Cotton requires 10.4 pounds per acre. The plant is naturally pest-resistant due to cannabinoid production in leaf tissue. Insects avoid it. Fungal infections are rare. The crop does not require chemical intervention to survive. The United States subsidizes corn production at $7.5 billion per year. It subsidizes soybean production at $5.4 billion per year. It subsidizes beef production through grazing rights, feed subsidies, and water access at an estimated $38 billion per year. Hemp cultivation remains federally restricted under the Controlled Substances Act, with cultivation permits requiring DEA approval, THC testing, and GPS location reporting. The crop that requires no water, no pesticides, and no subsidies is illegal. The crops that require all three are mandatory. This is not agriculture, this is enforcement. Modern research confirms what historical populations already knew. A 2020 study, published in the Journal of Agricultural and Food Chemistry Analyzed hemp seed protein bioavailability. The digestibility-corrected amino acid score was 0.91, comparable to whey protein at 1.0 and higher than soy protein at 0.84. The study concluded that hemp seed provides complete protein nutrition equivalent to animal sources. A 2019 study in the European Journal of Nutrition tracked cardiovascular markers in populations consuming hemp seed oil. After 12 weeks, participants showed a 23% reduction in LDL cholesterol and a 14% increase in HDL cholesterol. The omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in hemp seed oil is 3.1, the exact ratio recommended by the World Health Organization for cardiovascular health. A 2021 agronomic study in Field Crops Research compared hemp cultivation to conventional crops across soil types. Hemp produced viable yields in soil with pH levels between 5.5 and 8.0. Corn requires pH 6.0 to 7.0. Soybeans require pH 6.0 to 6.8. The study concluded that hemp could be cultivated on 480 million acres of global land, currently classified as too degraded for conventional agriculture. A 2018 study in Environmental Science and Pollution Research measured heavy metal uptake in hemp grown on contaminated soil. The plant absorbed lead, cadmium, and mercury from soil and sequestered it in stalk tissue, not seed tissue. This means hemp can be grown on industrial brownfield sites, remediating soil contamination while producing edible seed. The plant does not just survive in damaged soil, the plant repairs damaged soil. The science is not debating whether hemp is viable. The science is documenting why it outperforms the crops that replaced it. But the system that replaced it does not function on performance. It functions on control. The Marijuana Tax Act of 1937 did not ban hemp. It taxed it into extinction. The law imposed a transfer tax of $1 per ounce on hemp sales, equivalent to $18 per ounce in 2025 currency. Farmers were required to register with the federal government, pay annual fees, and submit to inspections. Non-compliance carried a penalty of up to 5 years in federal prison. The American Medical Association opposed the law. The American Hemp Growers Association opposed the law. The National Oilseed Institute opposed the law. The law passed anyway. The hearings lasted 2 hours. No agricultural experts were called to testify. The decision was not based on evidence. The decision was based on eliminating competition. By 1938, hemp cultivation in the United States had declined by 92%. By 1945, it had declined by 98%. The crop that had been required by law in colonial America became a federal crime in 1 generation. The Controlled Substances Act of 1970 reclassified hemp as a Schedule I narcotic, the same category as heroin. Schedule I classification requires proof that a substance has no currently accepted medical use and a high potential for abuse. Hemp seed contains 0.3% THC, below the psychoactive threshold. Lettuce contains more opioid alkaloids than hemp contains psychoactive cannabinoids. The classification was not pharmacological. The classification was agricultural. The 2018 Farm Bill legalized hemp cultivation under federal permit, but state-level bans remain in effect in Idaho, Mississippi, and South Dakota. Cultivation requires background checks, GPS reporting, and THC testing at harvest. If a crop tests above 0.3% THC, the entire harvest must be destroyed. Farmers cannot save seed. Seed must be purchased annually from certified suppliers. This is not legalization. This is controlled reintroduction under surveillance. The language changed, but the structure remained. The crop is no longer called illegal. It is called regulated. The effect is identical. This is not unique to hemp. Amaranth, cultivated by the Aztec Empire for 8,000 years, was banned by Spanish colonial authorities in 1519. The penalty for possession was death. The crop provided 14 grams of protein per 100 grams of seed and grew in drought conditions where wheat failed. It was classified as a pagan ritual plant. The real reason was that populations with amaranth did not need Spanish grain imports. Quinoa, cultivated in the Andes for 7,000 years, was suppressed by Spanish authorities and replaced with barley. The population experienced immediate malnutrition. Quinoa contains all 9 essential amino acids. Barley does not. The suppression was not religious. The suppression was economic. Breadfruit, cultivated across Polynesia for 3,000 years, was ignored by colonial plantation systems in the Caribbean. A single breadfruit tree produces 450 pounds of food per year for 50 years. Plantation economies required annual crops that could be controlled, taxed, and exported. Perennial food security was incompatible with the economic model. The pattern is consistent. The crops that provide food security without dependence are reclassified, banned, or erased. The future is not uncertain. The future is documented. Global grain reserves in 2025 stand at 74 days of consumption. In 1960, global reserves stood at 180 days. The buffer is shrinking. Climate models project a 20% decline in wheat yields by 2040 due to heat stress. Corn yields are projected to decline by 15%. Soybean yields are projected to decline by 12%. The crops that feed the current system are becoming less viable. The crop that was removed from the system is becoming more viable. Hemp grows in temperatures up to 95 degrees Celsius without yield loss. Wheat suffers heat stress above 86 degrees Celsius. Corn suffers heat stress above 91 degrees Celsius. As global temperatures rise, the crop that requires no irrigation, no pesticides, and no fertilizer becomes the crop that survives. Water scarcity is projected to affect 3.5 billion people by 2040. Hemp requires 1/6 the water of beef, 1/3 the water of almonds, and half the water of rice. In a water-scarce future, the crop that was banned is the crop that functions. Soil degradation is removing 24 billion tons of fertile soil per year. At current rates, global topsoil will be depleted in 60 years. Hemp restores soil structure, sequesters carbon, and requires no chemical inputs. The crop that was removed is the crop that regenerates the system. This is not prediction, this is trajectory. The system that required hemp's elimination is collapsing. The conditions that made hemp essential are returning. The crop that was classified as illegal is becoming necessary again. The reclassification will not be voluntary. The reclassification will be forced by system failure. What was erased is not gone. What was banned is still growing. The plant that survived 12,000 years of human civilization will survive the system that tried to erase it. The question is not whether the knowledge returns. The question is whether it returns before the system that replaced it collapses completely. History does not repeat by accident. History repeats because the conditions that created survival systems are returning, and the systems that replaced them cannot function under the same conditions. The crop that kept populations alive during famine is still illegal to grow in 47 states. The crop that required no water is banned while aquifers collapse. The crop that required no pesticides is prohibited while soil toxicity rises. The crop that provided food security for 12,000 years is classified as a controlled substance while food security collapses. This was not an accident. This was a system protecting itself from an alternative. But the system is not permanent. The conditions are. If this vault revealed something they tried to erase, subscribe to preserve what history tried to bury. Knowledge only survives when it is remembered. The next vault opens soon.